Alright, it is July 4th at 12:15 in the morning. Now, in honor of the 250th, this episode is about the battles of Lexington and Concord, which is the first time that the Americans truly put up a fight against the British. There have been dinky little skirmishes throughout. There was the Boston Massacre. There's been a couple things, but no organized, legitimate military movements against the British have happened before this point. Now, you have to take these battles as face value as possible. This is men who are legitimate militia and Minutemen that do not have an organized chain of command. There is no U.S. Army yet. We are still almost a year away, over a year away actually, from the Declaration of Independence. These are people that have militia, maybe, where they have designated meetup points with captains who report to maybe a major. And that's it. That is it. And these men that have really, really bad muskets and horrible, horrible tactics manage to outplay and out-tactic and beat the British with just resolve, hatred, and a couple tiny itty-bitty little bits of things the British will end up calling crimes or dishonorable. But it doesn't matter. You are fighting in a war here where the British are better on every single possible metric, with two exceptions that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't study the Revolutionary War that much. It's pretty cool, but I don't study it too much. So take everything that I'm about to say with a grain of salt. The British have two main things that they are better at. One of them being they are more experienced, they have better tactics, and the other being that they are just overall, early in the war, more prepared. They have better weapons, they have better cannons. Everything about them in every metric is better, almost, at the beginning of the war. The one thing that they do not have throughout the entire war, at no point in the war do they ever gain it, is the sheer undying resolve and determination by these new Americans to win this war. They were so fed up at this point that they were willing to die if it meant that they could live or have their kids see a day where they were free. And that is the one thing that the British could never take away, is just the sheer resolve of these civilians, militiamen, Minutemen, whatever you want to call them. And that is why we won Lexington and Concord and the next couple of years afterwards. Now, the guy you see on the screen here, his name is General Gage, and he is in charge of all of the British troops in the area at the time. Everybody around Boston is under command of General Gage. And General Gage sends out a detachment of about 500 British Marines to go and see Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who you see on the screen now, at Lexington, because they're currently lodging in Lexington, and he thinks that they are traitors and they need to be arrested, and we got to get them before things spiral out of control. Then, after they take those two, the British are to move on to Concord, where they will then proceed to take the gunpowder and any other things that could help a rebel cause out of Concord. So they have two objectives, they know what they're going to do, they have everybody set aside. The plans are slowly in motion, and this is the night of April 18th, the night before the battle starts. Well, somehow the word gets out through American intelligence, and the word gets passed down, and the word gets passed down, and then the word gets passed down to Paul Revere and another writer who was never talked of with the last name of Dawes. Now, Paul Revere and Dawes hear about this news and make a plan on how they're going to alert as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Now, this map you see on the screen here shows roughly where the British movements were during the day of the 19th during the battles of Lexington and Concord. You have the main unit, which seemingly floats across the water on this map. And then you have the reinforcements that go down by Roxbury and then up to Cambridge. Now, these were the two routes that the British could have used to get out of Boston and then move to Lexington and Concord in the top left. Now, you have the sea route and you have the land route. Revere was tasked with taking the sea route and is alerting as many people as he possibly could. And then Dawes was taking the land route, that bottom route you see, alerting as many people as they could. Now, this difference in paths between the two serves two main purposes. One of them is that they can alert as many people as possible. And two, if one gets captured, you still have a second rider on a different track alerting people and hopefully able to get to Samuel Adams and John Hancock. So both of the riders have left the tavern that they're sitting in Boston, and they are on the move on their respective routes. Dawes takes that land route, and Revere ends up on a rowboat rowing across the bay in Boston, which is highly illegal at this time, and he rows directly under a British warship, like super sneaky rows under the warship. Never heard about that. Fascinating stuff though. So then he manages to make it to the land. He gets given his horse, and this is where he starts his ride. And this is also where you have the lanterns in the steeple, one if by land, two if by sea. This is when the two riders learn that the British will be taking the sea route in the morning. Now, the British end up choosing the sea route because they do not know that the plans have been leaked. If they take the sea route, while it is a longer route because of the time it takes to get everybody on boats across the bay, they will go through less of the colonial scouts that they know are camping just outside of Boston on the land route. So it takes more time, but it's sneakier. So they take the sea route. Now, you see here Revere on his horse warning people. Now, if you were to look at this image, you might think that Revere is on his horse screaming, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" That was never said. At no point did Revere ever yell the British were coming from his horse. Now, this is because several, what we consider now Americans, still think of themselves as British at this time. Because they've been living in Britain, they want to break away from Britain on a lot of them, but they don't really think of themselves as Americans quite yet. So saying the British are coming is a little confusing. So both Dawes and Revere are going house to house, knocking on doors, telling people that they need to get ready and assemble on Lexington and Concord because the British are coming. Now, you have them going door to door, but they are also warning other riders to get on their horses and tell as many people as possible. It gets to the point that you might hear about Revere, you might hear about Dawes, and you might hear about this new guy Prescott in a minute, but you will never hear about the dozens and dozens of other riders that night that take part in warning as many people as possible. Now, Revere and Dawes do make it into Lexington, and they meet Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and they tell them, hey guys, y'all gotta move. And they do manage to get out in time, so they were not captured by the British at this time. However, they then decide that they need to go to Concord and warn Concord next. And just as they're leaving Lexington, they meet up with another rider, last name of Prescott. Prescott has just gotten back from his lover's house at 1 a.m. And he, encounters Revere and Dawes, and he decides that he's going to help them warn Concord. So he turns his horse around, and they start heading on to Concord. But along the way to Concord, Revere, Dawes, and Prescott end up getting stopped by the British. Revere gets thrown from his horse, he gets arrested. Dawes gets thrown from his horse, but he manages to escape on foot. Prescott manages to take his horse, jump it over a stone wall, and hightail it out of there on the way down to Concord. Now, he is going as fast as humanly possible to Concord, telling as many people as he can. And he makes it to Concord, and he manages to ring the bell from the steeple. He's telling everybody that'll listen that they need to get ready. And without Prescott, this night could have been a completely different night and the following day than what we saw. It is all of these riders coming together to help each other, and it's just so much more than just Revere on his horse telling people that they need to get ready. But you won't ever hear about Dawes or Prescott or the other dozens and dozens of riders. Now, this entire time, we are slowly going through the early morning hours. For example, the leader of the militia in Lexington is warned around midnight to 1 a.m. about what's going on. So you're in Lexington. This photograph here is a modern day photo of the Lexington Greens, which is where the Battle of Lexington took place. Now, 170 militia managed to make it to the Greens that morning before the British get there, which is a pretty good number if you consider what it takes to get militia ready to go. It is in a time where there's no phones. It is solely people going door to door, knocking on the doors, and 170 people managed to get ready and assembled in their spots within a handful of hours. They got ready, and they got ready fast. But the first of two major fumbles happen here on this green. The first one is this guy you see on screen. This is Captain John Parker, and he's in charge of all the militia in Lexington. And he tells his soldiers, after a couple of hours of waiting, that they can disperse and they can go back home, but they have to be ready at a moment's notice to get back to the green. And literally a handful of hours later, we're talking these guys assemble at 1 in the morning, and at like 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning, the British soldiers show up. Like, it's barely breaking daylight when the British show up. Well, only about 70 of the militia managed to make it back to the Greens in time. And even if they had 170 men, it really was probably going to end up being the same outcome because they were facing 500 of a premier fighting force. But the point is, the massive fumble, right? Like 170 people, and you just lost over half of them because nobody wanted to wait around. But Parker has all of his men ready to go, all 70 of them that remain, and he's waiting on the green for the British to show up. And the British do show up around first light, except Parker orders his men to not fire unless fired upon. Because again, this is the first conflict of the war. Nobody knows what is about to go down over the next day. And a lot of them don't even have their rifles loaded, and we'll get to that in a second as well. But seeing just the sheer amount of redcoats show up across from them on the green, Parker decides to order his men to disperse. Now, the photograph you see here is a more organized painting of what happens. More accounts recall that he orders his men to disperse, and a lot of guys disperse. Some of them stay in lines, but not a whole lot. Again, there's only 70 of them. Not a whole lot of guys. But the British also are yelling at the militia to disperse, but without their guns. Somebody ends up firing. To this day, nobody knows who fired the first shot. You know, the shot heard around the world, started the revolution. Nobody knows who fired that first shot. And anybody that says they know is lying. Like, it's so bad to the point that you can go online and look up for hours who fired the first shot, and you'll see one website that says it was confidently a British soldier. It was confidently an American soldier. You scroll far enough, you're going to see some random dude that said that a German soldier fired the first shot, I bet. Nobody knows to this day. But somebody fires. A British officer somewhere in the line is quoted by saying, "By God, men, fire. Fire now." Well, this causes the British to open fire in a massive volley on the retreating Minutemen, and 8 U.S. men are killed with 10 wounded. Now, again, the militia do not have their rifles loaded. We'll get to that in a minute. But the ones that do manage to load their muskets do fire back, and we managed to wound one singular redcoat, and that's it. That's the whole Battle of Lexington. Super duper tiny. The entire thing lasts minutes. So the British move on to Concord after routing the militiamen at Lexington, and they start walking their way around. But there's one other thing I'd like to talk about at Lexington, and I kind of left it out because I couldn't find if it was like factually true. Like, I could not find anything that truly said this was true or this wasn't true. And I want it to be true, so that's what I'm going to tell you guys. But take this with a grain of salt. It is believed that Paul Revere, after being released from being detained by the British that morning, makes it back to Lexington, and he is walking around the Lexington Green before the firing starts with some of the documents from Samuel Adams and John Hancock. And the image of Paul Revere just like happily walking behind the militiamen with a giant chest of papers just really makes me happy. So I want to believe it's true, but again, take that with a grain of salt. So now the British are moving on towards Concord, and the photograph you see here is the British moving into Concord in their massive, massive rows of just impossible amounts of redcoats. 500 redcoats at the time, amassed in one army, was a legitimate formidable fighting force, but they managed to make it to Concord around 8-ish in the morning. And the British are meeting light resistance as they move into Concord, but there's nothing crazy. So the militia and Minutemen that made it to Concord decide to retreat across the Old North Bridge and regroup on a hill overlooking Concord. Now, the British, they're mad. Like, they're really mad at this point. They were not expecting resistance like this, and they're trying to find the gunpowder, and they can't find the gunpowder, so they are dumping flour in ponds. They're setting fire to cannons. They're throwing bullets and cannonballs in more ponds. But the fires that they end up setting in the town caused 2 major issues for them. And if they hadn't set these fires, again, we could have seen a wildly different day play out. The first thing that the fires do is they catch fire of local buildings. Now, the British are still in a time where they're like, honorable and we need to fight according to the gentleman's way. So because these houses caught fire and they're random civilians, we should help them. So the British end up wasting a bunch of time trying to put out these fires. And the other thing that ends up happening is that you have all of these militia and Minutemen that are moving up on this hill, and you are up to over 1,000 men at this point on top of the hill, and they think that Concord is being burnt down. They think that Concord is being razed and ransacked. So you have Captain Davis of the Acton Minutemen showing up, and he says, "My God, they are burning down Concord. We have to go now." So all the militia organize into this massive, massive line. They are 3 abreast and then almost a mile long, just a mile of militiamen. Now, leading the charge is Captain Davis of the Acton Minutemen, the guy that was like, "We gotta go, they're burning down Concord." And he is quoted as saying, "I haven't a man that is afraid to go." Now, the other major thing that is happening with this battle is they have their guns loaded. This is a massive, massive escalation at this point. Before this time, if you had your gun loaded, that was an act of treason. That was an act of attempted murder. That was 1,000 things. And the act of having all of their weapons loaded is basically an act of war. But they think that their city's being burned down, so they load their weapons anyway, and they start marching down to the Old North Bridge. Now, as they're marching down to the Old North Bridge, the British retreat across the bridge because they see 3 abreast and then going up the hill and then seemingly going on forever, and they think that their time is up, their goose is cooked. So they retreat across the Old North Bridge and they start moving planks. And in this photograph you see here, you can kind of see some of the planks that are pulled up from this bridge. Well, if your enemy can't cross the bridge, they have to go all the way around. This is a legitimate tactic. Now, I could not find a whole lot that backed this up either, so take this with a little bit of salt as well. This is the only other thing that you need to take a little bit of salt with, and that is an American officer sees the British pulling up planks from the Old North Bridge and literally yells at them to stop removing the planks, and they do. The British stop removing the planks and they just back off, and the painting kind of helps that idea, like it helps that theory, because you can see the planks were pulled up, but they stopped. So take that how you want. But the British are now in line, ready to go across the Old North Bridge, and they are ready to fire. So they fire a warning shot at the Americans. The Americans don't care. They're ready to go. They think their city's been burnt down, so they keep moving along. Well, eventually, they do get within range of the British, and the British see that, nope, this is happening. There's about to be a battle, so they fire a volley into the Americans, immediately killing 2. Now, this does not stop the Americans. This makes them beyond mad, like actually just seething mad. And this is where I like to imagine the war actually started. Lexington was just a terrible show of like misplanning, and there wasn't enough people. Concord, though, you have these shots fired, you have these 2 Americans killed, but the commanding officer just leads them on. And the volley that the Americans fire in response is so devastating that the British receive 3 killed and 4 officers wounded. They immediately break rank and just scatter back into Concord. Now, it might not seem like a lot. We're talking about 7 people killed and wounded, but 4 officers wounded in a volley or 2 is a impossibly bad thing to happen on your side during the Revolutionary War. This is a time where officers control their men so intently and so harshly that when one officer goes down, you can have an entire battle change because one officer is killed. And if not the whole battle, absolutely the immediate area around them. I mean, this was catastrophic for the British to receive 4 wounded officers. So the British regroup, and they now see that there's 1,000 American militiamen amassed, and they are coming across the Old North Bridge, and they realize that it's time to go. They have had a partially successful mission. They won at Lexington. They end up finding some of the cannons and gunpowder and some of the stuff they wanted to at Concord. And they didn't get Adams or Hancock, but it's fine. They had a partially successful mission. So they start retreating the way they came. However, The Americans are not done yet. We are not done at all. This is where the majority of all of the deaths and injuries from this battle happen, and that is the retreat of the British all the way back to Boston. So the British are moving out, but militia have been and are currently amassing on both sides of the road, literally all the way back to Boston. The entire road back to Boston just has random little soldiers sitting around. Now, if you've seen The Patriot, with, starring Mel Gibson, they do a bunch of these like hit and run tactics. Like they never stay around to fight the British. This is exactly what is happening during this retreat, and the British hate it. The British think it is the most cowardly, ungentlemanly thing to ever be done in battle, and they hate it. But it works with resounding success. It works so well during this day that we use it for the rest of the war. Now, this is early guerrilla warfare, shoot and scoot tactics. This is used by so many different militaries even today, and it is so effective because you can't ever truly stop the enemy from doing what they're doing. If they shoot and scoot, that's it. You're done. So this is exactly what's happening on this retreat. And as they're walking back, just British soldiers getting picked off one by one by one. This photograph that you see here is a drawing depicting the British trying to leave Concord. And you can see militiamen behind fence posts and walls and running around, picking off different British officers as they leave the smoking Concord. Now, there are 1,000 New Englanders that have made the trek all night and all morning, waiting at Merriam's Corner for the British to funnel into a small area to cross a small bridge. And as they lay in wait for the British show up, and they fire a volley at the New Englanders. Every single bullet misses. They shot so high, like next zip code over high. And the Americans shoot back, and they hit their marks horribly. I mean, British soldiers are falling left and right. There's a couple killed, but more importantly, several British soldiers are now wounded. Well, they keep walking, and they have their wounded with them. And they make it to Fisk Hill, which is just outside of Lexington. And they are once again ambushed again. And it is here that more officers are wounded. More soldiers are wounded. They are now low on ammo, and they have so many wounded that they are so slow now that other militia are starting to catch up to them. So they are now starting to have soldiers panic and run away. They are leaving wounded on the ground in an attempt to get away from the militia, except they can't, because the militia are literally everywhere at this point. So they keep walking, and they make it to just outside of Lexington. And just outside of Lexington, you have this photograph where Captain Parker, the guy that was there at Lexington in the morning, is waiting with the remaining men. Some of them are still in bandages too, and they fire on the British, causing even more casualties. But then the British do end up making it inside of Lexington. They're reinforced with a couple of cannons, all the reinforcements that you saw on the map earlier, and that's it for the day. Now, they retire on Bunker Hill, of all places, the site of Bunker Hill that happens about a year and change, year and a half later. And then the next day, being chased by 4,000 militiamen, they make it back into Boston. Now, final casualty rates do vary pretty heavily depending on which websites and which journals and which books you read and look at. But the averages seem to be around 90 to 100 Americans killed and wounded across the day, and 300 British killed and wounded. So a resounding American victory by the end of the day, like an undeniable American victory. Yes, we lost individually at Lexington. Yes, we did have Concord get sacked. But by the end of the day, who came out on top? USA! So now the British are in Boston, and they have 15,000 militiamen sitting on top of the ridge that goes around Boston, laying siege to Boston. And it is here that for the next year that they lay siege until the British end up leaving Boston. This is also where 4th of July happens. As they're sitting around, 4th of July happens, and we get our independence. And also, the 15,000 militiamen that are sitting around waiting in Boston become the Continental Army. A lot of these guys go on to sign 6-month, year-long, until the war's over contracts, where they formed the new army. And it is for an entire year from Lexington to Concord to when the Continental Army that's formed is that it's just militia sitting outside of Boston, waiting and withholding our cause until we get ready and really start mounting an offensive against the British. And it is just absolutely insane that you have a bunch of ragtag Americans that are tired and fed up, and they managed to put up such a good resistance that we won the day. We win a year later by kicking them out of Boston, and then the war truly starts. And there we go. That's our independence. So really fascinating stuff to look at. It really is. A lot of the stuff in the Revolutionary War is really fascinating because the unit sizes were pretty small back then. Like, individual casualties can be named pretty easily. So if you enjoyed this episode and you want me to do more on the Revolutionary War or any other things, leave a comment and I'll look into it and maybe I'll get around to it at some point. But thanks for joining this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.